The child who would one day rule the world was born in silence. No drums, no marble inscriptions, no legions chanting his name, only the distant echo of waves crashing against the northern cliffs of Moesia. His mother, Helena, a humble innkeeper's daughter, clutched her newborn son and whispered a single prayer, that he might survive the world that would soon despise him. For the court of Rome did not celebrate bastards. Constantius Chlorus, the boy's father and a rising general of imperial blood, had ambitions too great to be tethered to love. Yet, when he looked upon his son's gray-green eyes, the color of the storm-tossed Adriatic, something stirred in him. He named him Constantine, meaning steadfast. A name for a soldier, a name for a survivor. But in Rome's golden palaces, survival was a cruel art. Constantine grew up in shadows, a quiet observer of splendor he could never claim. He was permitted to walk beside the marble courtyards, but never on the imperial carpets. While other children of nobility studied rhetoric and history beneath gilded ceilings, he trained alone with wooden swords, listening to the laughter of those who would someday kneel to him. From the beginning, whispers followed him, of a prophecy murmured by an old oracle in Nicomedia: a son of no lawful bed shall wear the crown of Rome. The courtiers mocked it. The priests dismissed it. But Constantine never forgot. When he watched senators debate under painted ceilings, he wondered how many of them would crawl if destiny called his name. His father, ever pragmatic, taught him the politics of restraint. "The empire does not reward virtue, my son," Constantius said once, during a rare moment of honesty. "It rewards perception. Learn to look like what they want to see, and wait for the moment they blink." Constantine learned. He watched how generals swore loyalty with one hand and sharpened daggers with the other. He saw how emperors praised the gods one morning and sacrificed their enemies by dusk, and he began to understand that power was not inherited. It was taken. One night, a comet streaked across the horizon above Nicomedia's palace, lighting the sky with blood and silver. The superstitious panicked, calling it an omen of death. But Constantine, standing alone on the balcony, felt something different. A pull, a whisper, almost a promise. He would not remain a shadow forever. For in the heart of Rome, where gods and men played their eternal game for supremacy, a bastard had begun to dream of thrones. And Rome, though it did not yet know it, had just taken its first breath before a storm. The empire mourned the death of Constantius Chlorus, but Constantine knew better. Mourning in Rome was merely another theater act. Beneath the marble columns and solemn prayers, daggers gleamed in the dark. His father's last command had been simple: take command of the legions in Britannia. But the moment Constantius' pyre turned to ash, Rome's alliances turned to smoke. The imperial council declared another man, Severus, as rightful emperor, and whispers spread that Constantine's bloodline, tainted by birth and ambition, was too dangerous to trust. That night, his tent in Aborcum was set ablaze. He woke to the crackle of fire and the screams of soldiers. His most trusted aide lay dead outside, throat cut, a warning carved into his chest: "The bastard shall not reign." Constantine did not hesitate. He rode through the flames, his cloak catching sparks as he vanished into the mist. Behind him, the camp erupted in chaos. Loyalty shattered, oaths forgotten. He fled eastward, a fugitive prince with only his horse, a handful of gold, and the ghost of his father's blessing. For weeks, he crossed barbarian lands, forests thick as cathedrals, rivers swollen with ice, and villages where Roman banners were nothing but torn memories. The men he gathered were outcasts like him, deserters, mercenaries, slaves seeking vengeance. Around lonely campfires they whispered of his destiny, calling him the rightful heir, the chosen one, the emperor foretold. Constantine said nothing, but in his eyes burned something fierce, a defiance that even the gods could not ignore. At night, dreams came. Firestorms over Rome, a shadowed figure standing on a hill of corpses, reaching toward a blinding light, a voice, neither man nor god, calling his name in languages he did not understand. Each dawn he woke in a cold sweat, unsure whether he was being summoned or cursed. In one dream, the light took form. a cross made of flame hovering above the world. Beneath it, he saw armies kneeling. Then, silence. The vision seared itself into his mind, leaving him trembling. He told no one. Not yet. Months later, he reached Nicomedia, the seat of imperial power. The city glittered under the eastern sun, its marble temples devoted to gods that no longer spoke. Within those walls sat Emperor Galerius, his father's old rival and his greatest threat. When Constantine entered the palace, all eyes turned. A bastard, thought forgotten, had returned. Galerius smiled, but it was the smile of a man measuring how deep to dig the grave. As the court bowed, Constantine's heart thundered. The boy who once watched from shadows now stood in the lion's den. He would not run again. If Rome would not give him his destiny, he would seize it, piece by bloody piece. The empire had become a carcass, and every emperor a vulture. From the ruins of loyalty rose chaos. 4 men now claimed the right to rule Rome. Armies clashed not for glory but for survival, and in the smoke-choked fields of battle, the old gods seemed deaf to their worshippers. Constantine watched it all with a heart that no longer trusted heaven. He had bent his knee to Jupiter, sacrificed to Mars, burned incense to every deity whose favor he could buy, yet the skies remained silent. The priests told him the gods demanded more blood. So he gave it. Villages burned, temples looted, and banners raised in his name. But even amid victory, Constantine felt an emptiness growing, an invisible hand tugging him toward something he could not yet name. One night, as he marched his legions toward Rome to confront the usurper Maxentius, the heavens themselves turned to fire. The sun sank behind black clouds, and a strange shimmer appeared in the air. A cross of light, suspended above the dying day. The soldiers murmured in fear. Some fell to their knees, others cursed the omen. But Constantine, he stared. The vision seared across his mind like a blade, a blazing sign in the sky, and words that burned in his soul. In this sign conquer. He blinked, and it was gone. Yet its echo remained, humming through his veins like divine thunder. That night, in his tent, sleep abandoned him. He turned to his closest advisors, veterans hardened by war, and demanded they explain the vision. The priests of Mars called it trickery, a conjuring of clouds. A Christian convert, timid but brave, whispered that it was the mark of Christos, the one true God. Constantine dismissed him at first, but as the night deepened, the memory of that light refused to fade. The next morning he summoned his armorer. "Paint the sign," he commanded, "on every shield, every banner, every sword that goes into battle." The armorer hesitated. "My lord, this is not the symbol of Rome." Constantine's eyes flashed like drawn steel. "Then let Rome learn a new one." The next day, thousands of shields shimmered with the strange symbol, a cross entwined with letters the soldiers did not understand. They marched beneath it, their armor catching the rising sun, their hearts trembling with both faith and fear. As they neared the Milvian Bridge, Constantine rode before them, the air thick with smoke and prophecy. The wind carried the cries of the dying empire, and the emperor who once prayed to Mars now whispered to a god he barely knew. If the vision was madness, let madness lead him to victory. If it was divine, then Rome itself would kneel before his new god. The morning of the battle dawned red, a sun bleeding through the mists of the Tiber. From the high banks, Constantine watched his army array itself like a storm about to break. Shields glinted with the strange news sign he had ordered painted upon them. The cross entwined with the Chi-Rho, the first letters of the Christos name. To his men it was a talisman. To him it was a wager against heaven itself. Across the river stood Maxentius, the self-proclaimed emperor of Rome, his legions stretching like a serpent along the opposite bank. Drums thundered from their ranks, drowning out the prayers of Constantine's soldiers. Between them lay the Milvian Bridge, a narrow span of wood and rope, the only path into the Eternal City. Maxentius had ordered the bridge weakened, set to collapse under enemy weight. A trap for fools, he thought. Yet, in his arrogance, he marched his men upon it, confident that Rome's ancient gods still favored him. Constantine's generals urged caution. "Wait for dawn's full light, sire. The omens are uncertain." But Constantine's gaze was fixed upon the sky, the same sky that had once burned with divine fire. "The sign was given," he murmured. "We march now." The horn sounded. The legion surged forward, the riverbanks erupting into chaos. Arrows hissed through the air like serpents. The water below churned with bodies and blood. Constantine rode at the front, his crimson cloak whipping behind him, his eyes alight with both fury and faith. Every clang of sword and scream of dying men seemed to echo the same words inside his skull. In this sign, conquer. The cross gleamed upon his shield, spattered with mud and blood, yet somehow radiant. He struck down foe after foe, until the river itself seemed to roar his name. Across the bridge, Maxentius, forces faltered. Panic rippled through the ranks as the weakened timbers gave way beneath their feet. The bridge collapsed. Thousands plunged into the Tiber, their armor dragging them into the depths. Among them was Maxentius himself, the emperor swallowed by the river he thought would protect him. When silence finally fell, the waters ran dark with death. Constantine stood at the river's edge, his chest heaving, his sword heavy. His soldiers knelt, crying out that the Christian God had delivered them. But Constantine's triumph was not pure joy. It was awe mixed with terror. He looked upon the drowned corpse of his rival and whispered, "Was it faith or fate?" Rome opened its gates to him that evening, hailing him as savior. Banners bearing the cross fluttered above the city for the first time. Yet even as cheers filled the air, Constantine's eyes searched the heavens for the light that had once burned there. It did not return. In victory, he had conquered the world, but perhaps lost something far greater. Rome had not seen such triumph since the days of Augustus. Banners of crimson and gold fluttered above marble arches, while the streets overflowed with flowers and incense. The people called Constantine the savior of Rome, the emperor chosen by heaven. Yet as he rode through the city gates, beneath statues of gods he no longer served, he felt neither peace nor holiness, only the weight of something he could not name. He had won with the cross, but what, truly, had he pledged himself to? In the Senate, old men in togas bowed to him with trembling hands. They spoke honeyed words about destiny, calling his victory divine. Behind them, whispers bloomed like mold. The bastard has made himself God's weapon. Pagan priests demanded that he sacrifice to Jupiter in gratitude. Bishops, emboldened by his rise, urged him to destroy the idols and proclaim the Christos as Lord of all. Constantine listened to them all and trusted none. That night in the imperial palace, he walked among the torchlit statues of forgotten gods. Their stone eyes seemed to follow him, cold, accusing. At the feet of Mars he paused. "You betrayed me," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "Or perhaps I betrayed you first." His mother, Helena, found him there, a frail figure in a hooded cloak, her face lined with wisdom and faith. "You've been chosen, my son," she said softly. "The cross did not lead you to victory by chance. It is a calling." Constantine looked at her, torn between belief and calculation. "Perhaps," he said, "but a calling can be convenient. Rome needed a god to unite it. I merely gave it one." Helena's eyes filled with sorrow. "If you play at holiness, the heavens may decide to take you at your word." The following day, Constantine issued his first great decree, the Edict of Toleration. Christianity was no longer a crime. No more crucifixions, no more persecutions. To the world, it was an act of mercy. To Constantine, it was strategy, a weapon sharper than any sword. Temples of the old gods began to empty, their treasures quietly seized for the state. Bishops gained influence in the Senate. Churches rose beside forums where sacrifices once burned. Rome, once the empire of 1,000 gods, began to kneel before one. But as the city's faith shifted, so too did its soul. In secret, pagan priests gathered in catacombs, vowing vengeance. Senators muttered that the emperor had traded Rome's eternal gods for a fisherman's ghost. And Helena, ever devout, prayed for her son's heart, fearing that he had traded his salvation for power. From his balcony, Constantine gazed upon a city remade in his image. Radiant by torchlight, trembling beneath unseen storms. He had united Rome. Yet beneath the hymns and praise, he could already hear the first whispers of rebellion. Trust had always been a dangerous luxury for Constantine, but Licinius had been different. Childhood friends, allies forged in the fires of exile and ambition, brothers in arms against the chaos of Rome. He had thought Licinius loyalty unshakable. Yet empire, like a living beast, demanded sacrifices that no bond could withstand. The first signs came quietly, delayed messages, troops mysteriously missing at key battles, whispers in the corridors of power. Constantine ignored them at first, unwilling to believe that Licinius, the man who had once shielded him from assassins and shared in the bitter bread of exile, could betray him. Then came the ultimatum. Licinius declared himself emperor in the East, claiming divine sanction and the loyalty of half the legions. Letters arrived dripping with venom and righteous accusation, each word a dagger aimed at Constantine's heart. The old bond, once sacred, had been shredded in ink. In the council tent, Constantine stood before his generals, sword in hand, face shadowed beneath his helmet. "He was my brother," he said, voice low, almost inaudible, "and now he is my enemy." The men murmured, torn between pity and loyalty. Civil war was inevitable, and the land itself seemed to sense the coming storm. The campaign that followed was merciless. Fields became tombs. Villages burned as both armies fought not only for land, but for destiny itself. Constantine rode at the forefront, the cross upon his shield gleaming in the sun, a banner of hope to his men and a warning to his foes. Each swing of his sword carried the weight of betrayal, each victory a step further from innocence. When Licinius was finally captured, the betrayal reached its bitter apex. The man who had once shared his dreams, his fears, his nights of hunger and exile, now knelt before him as a prisoner. Bishops argued for mercy, priests demanded justice, soldiers whispered for blood. Constantine hesitated, feeling the tug of both mercy and wrath. In the end, he chose power over sentiment. Licinius was executed, his death both a political necessity and a personal torment. Even the bishops, once eager to hail Constantine as God's instrument, shuddered at the emperor's decisive cruelty. Some whispered that the cross he carried was no longer a symbol of faith, but of calculated ambition. That night, as he walked alone through the camp, the fires casting long shadows across the broken earth, Constantine looked toward the heavens. The vision that had once lit his path, the cross of light, seemed distant, almost judgmental. He had claimed victory, but the cost was greater than blood. Every betrayal left a scar upon the soul, he realized, and in ruling Rome one learned quickly that power demanded the sacrifice of everything, even those we love most. He had conquered his brother, his enemy, his past. Yet in the silence of the night, Constantine wondered whether he had also begun to lose himself. Helena had always been the quiet force behind Constantine, the steady hand that guided him when ambition threatened to consume him. Now, years later, she set out on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, her heart heavy with both devotion and fear. She had seen her son rise from shadow to throne, witnessed his victories and cruelties, and prayed constantly for his soul. Yet even she did not anticipate the revelation that awaited her. The journey was long and treacherous, through desert winds that cut like knives and cities scarred by conquest. Helena traveled not as the emperor's mother, but as a humble pilgrim, seeking the sacred relics of the Christian faith. When she finally reached Jerusalem, the city thrummed with whispers of miracles and miracles half hidden in shadows. It was in a dimly lit chapel, amidst incense and flickering candlelight, that Helena uncovered it, the true cross, claimed by the faithful to be the very instrument of Christ's crucifixion. She knelt, trembling, and examined the wood, the inscriptions, the relics surrounding it. Her heart sank. Something about it, the way it was displayed, the stories told, the testimonies of priests, suggested manipulation. The cross that had inspired her son's faith, the symbol that had crowned him emperor, may not be genuine. Fear gripped her. If Constantine discovered this, the revelation could unravel everything he had built, his image, his faith, his empire. Yet she also understood the moral peril. Could she allow him to continue under a lie? Or was the truth too dangerous for him, and for the world he ruled? Returning to Constantinople, Helena concealed her knowledge. walking the halls of the palace as if nothing had changed. But the weight of truth pressed upon her with every step. In her private chambers, she wept, prayed, and struggled with the impossible. Love for a son and the knowledge that he may be building his empire upon a foundation of illusion. When Constantine sought her counsel, she measured her words carefully. "The gods, or perhaps God, tests us all," she said softly, never revealing her discovery. "You have been chosen, Constantine, but a throne built on lies can crumble beneath even the strongest hand." The emperor, sensing an unspoken tension, studied her carefully. "Mother, what do you fear?" he asked, voice low and commanding, yet tinged with the tenderness reserved for her alone. Helena met his gaze, and in that moment, the bond of blood and faith became a silent battlefield. For the first time, Constantine understood that his greatest enemy was not rebellion or war, but truth itself, fragile, dangerous, and capable of toppling even the mightiest of kings. Helena's vision had shaken the foundations of his empire before he even knew it existed. And as the candles flickered across her face, Constantine realized that the cross he bore might be both his salvation and his undoing. The air above the Bosporus shimmered with heat, dust, and the dreams of an emperor. Constantine stood atop the hill, overlooking the marshlands and hills that would soon bear the name Constantinople. From this vantage, he saw more than earth and water. He saw possibility, power, and the promise of immortality. Here, he would build a city that would outshine Rome, a capital forged in the image of both God and man. But vision alone could not shape stone and timber. Pagan nobles, their faces etched with suspicion and resentment, brought their grudging compliance. Christian bishops pressed for every church to rise before a single palace was complete. Courtiers schemed in shadows, offering loyalty with one hand while sharpening knives with the other. The very foundations of the city were soaked in ambition, deceit, and whispered threats. Constantine walked among the laborers and architects, listening to reports of construction, of aqueducts and forums, of churches built beside basilicas. Each brick laid was a statement. Rome was no longer the center of the world. Constantinople would be. Yet even as he oversaw the grandeur, he could feel the currents of conspiracy swirling beneath him. In the evening, as the sun painted the waters gold, a messenger arrived with news of rebellion. A noble family in the western provinces had refused his authority, declaring allegiance to old pagan rites. Soldiers would march at dawn, but the unrest gnawed at Constantine's mind. Every victory he achieved seemed to plant the seeds of the next war. He climbed the city walls, gazing over the burgeoning streets, and saw children playing beneath half-built towers, priests chanting from scaffolds, and merchants arguing over the price of grain. Constantinople was alive, but alive with danger. Every smile hid envy, every bow potential betrayal. That night, Constantine prayed, not in humility, but in calculation. The cross he bore was both symbol and shield, a promise to his soldiers, a warning to his enemies. Yet he knew that faith alone could not bind the city together. Power required fear, diplomacy, and vision. He would need all three to survive. In private chambers, he met with his closest advisors, some Christian, some pagan, all eager to twist his decrees for their own gain. Constantine listened, weighed, and decided. Each choice was a gamble. Granting authority to one faction could spark rebellion in another. In this city of gods and men, control was never absolute. It was a constant negotiation with fate itself. As night deepened, he walked along the unfinished walls, the sounds of the city rising behind him like a symphony of life and chaos. He thought of Helena's warnings, of Licinius, betrayal, of visions in the sky, and of the empire he had inherited and remade. Here, at the crossroads of continents and faiths, Constantine realized the greatest battle was no longer against armies, rivals, or even gods. It was against time, ambition, and the fragile faith that held his world together. Constantinople would rise or fall under his hand. The palace of Constantinople was silent, but its walls seemed to whisper of impending doom. Constantine, once a man of unshakable resolve, now felt the creeping weight of mortality pressing upon him. His health had begun to fail, a subtle tremor in his hand, a lingering cough that no physician could cure. Yet it was not age alone that haunted him. it was the fracture within his own bloodline. His sons, born into privilege and power, had grown under the shadow of his glory. They were taught to rule, to command armies, to wield faith as both shield and weapon. But ambition is a cunning teacher. Where Constantine saw promise, he found treachery. The brothers, each craving the throne, began to spy, plot, and maneuver against one another. Alliances formed in whispers, only to dissolve in betrayal. Every council meeting became a stage for manipulation. Every family dinner, a courtroom of suspicion. Constantine watched from his chamber, torn between fatherly love and imperial necessity. He knew that to intervene directly would be to risk exposing weakness. To do nothing was to invite disaster. The empire, vast and unsteady, trembled under the weight of prophecy, ambition, and human folly. At night, visions returned with relentless insistence. Angels argued with demons over the fate of his soul. In one dream, he saw his sons battling atop the palace walls, swords gleaming in moonlight, blood dripping onto the city below. In another, the empire itself cracked, as if the stones of Constantinople were collapsing under the weight of his decisions. Constantine awoke drenched in sweat, haunted by the question he had long sought to ignore. Had I made men in my image, or monsters? Even the priests and bishops whispered their fears. Some blamed divine judgment, claiming the unrest within his family was punishment for his sins. The betrayals, the executions, the manipulations of faith. Others remained silent, fearing the emperor's wrath if they spoke too plainly. Yet amidst the turmoil, Constantine remained ruler. His mind, once sharpened by ambition and strategy, now labored under fear. He walked the halls alone, listening to the laughter and scheming that echoed in corridors, knowing that loyalty was fragile and that even the closest advisors might betray him if it suited their ends. As the days passed, the emperor's thoughts turned inward. Every decision, every act of mercy or cruelty seemed to echo in eternity. The empire might survive, but at what cost to his soul? His sons' hatred and rivalry were not merely a threat to succession. They were a reflection of the choices he had made, the path he had chosen, and the legacy he would leave. In the quiet of the palace, Constantine understood that the greatest battle of all was not fought with armies or gods. It was fought within the heart, and the prize was fleeting. A father's peace, a ruler's certainty, a soul not yet lost. The chamber was dim, lit only by trembling candles that cast long, dancing shadows upon the cold marble walls. Constantine lay upon his bed, frail now, the strength of years of war and ambition stripped from him. His breaths came shallow, each one a reminder that time, relentless and unforgiving, had finally caught up with the man who had defied emperors, gods, and fate itself. Around him stood priests, bishops, and courtiers, their faces masks of reverence and fear. Some had served him for decades, some only moments, but all were aware that the final act of this emperor's life would echo through history. And yet, Constantine's mind was neither on glory nor ceremony. He thought of the countless lives taken in his name, of friends betrayed, of brothers crushed beneath the weight of ambition. He wondered with a quiet terror whether salvation had ever been his to claim. The water was poured over his brow, cold and luminous in the candlelight. The ritual, simple yet profound, seemed to carry the weight of heaven and hell in equal measure. Constantine felt it seep into him. Not just water, but memory, guilt, hope, and fear. Every choice he had made, every life he had shaped or destroyed, seemed to rise and fall within that small stream. Voices murmured prayers, yet Constantine heard another sound beneath them. The echoes of those he had wronged, the whispers of angels and demons, debating, accusing, forgiving, condemning. For a moment, he could see it all. The cross of light above the Milvian Bridge, the faces of his slain enemies, the tears of his mother, the scheming eyes of his sons, the empire he had built, the city that bore his name, the faith he had wielded like a blade, all of it converged in a single overwhelming vision. A question haunted him now, sharper than any sword. Did I serve God or myself? No answer came, only the soft hiss of the water and the flicker of candles. Constantine's eyes, once fierce and commanding, softened with the weight of mortality. He had conquered emperors, enemies, and empires. He had bent gods and men to his will. Yet in this quiet chamber, surrounded by the shadows of his life, he faced the one power he could not command: judgment. The water slid down his brow, leaving him shivering yet strangely calm. Outside, the city of Constantinople hummed with life, oblivious to the drama unfolding within the imperial walls. History would remember him as Constantine the Great, the emperor who changed the world, the man who embraced a new faith and forged a new empire. But in the silence of that chamber, with shadows stretching long, and the flicker of candlelight trembling against the walls, only the heavens knew whether the man who had shaped history had ever truly been saved. And as his eyes closed for the last time, Constantine felt the weight of all he had been and all he had done settle upon him. Neither victory nor defeat, but the uneasy truth of a life both exalted and haunted.